Okay, hello everybody. This is lecture 8, and I'm recording this while I'm away in India. And yeah, so the idea of social innovation and design thinking has really been present across the different lectures and across the semester. In fact, I've said design thinking, at least as far as we have presented it, and as far as the cases that you've looked at, is often about finding social solutions, innovative social solutions. Not always, because of course the history of design thinking was also connected with uh, business, but things have moved on, and with the application of design thinking into lots of new spaces, health, literacy, and so on, it certainly is a more interesting game these days. So design thinking for innovation, fine. That was always the case. Design thinking for social innovation has been a little bit more of a more recent, at least, phenomenon. So some of the questions that need clarifying and answering, well, by you and um, by anybody who's practically involved with this, are all the terms that social is connected to in this sort of space, because they all mean something slightly different. Social design is a term, a phrase that's used a lot by different designers. Possibly some of you have heard of Ezio Mancini. He's quite well known in this area. And essentially that is design for some kind of social purpose. Right? So social design of itself is not the same as social innovation, but just design for social purposes. The other important term, which actually comes up in relation to your business model as well, because we like to measure the things that we're trying to achieve, and so we design for social impact. The term social impact means what are the measurable outcomes that we want to achieve with our project or our initiative. That is, for example, how many people will we employ? How many women will we employ? Um, we need to put numbers on what we're trying to achieve. If we do that, if we have social objectives, then that will affect our business model. And you'll see, and I'll talk later in a moment about Ingrid Burkett's work on designing social enterprise. So one of the business models behind design for social ends is social enterprise, and there are also some other models as well. Social business is another one. So as before, we're also looking at or for good examples, and I think already with some of the case studies you've shown, you've talked about some of those good examples. That is, design with social purposes, sometimes innovative, and with business models that may be like social enterprise. I think something like Arsili from last week is a case in point. So social enterprise as a business model matters, and so social enterprise, at least as far as we talk about it, is the underlying business model for firms or organizations that have a social purpose and are not just about creating profit. What this means for you, what it means for the project, is that typically the kind of business model that you will design for the project and for the organization or the initiative that you're developing will probably be a social enterprise. And hence Ingrid Burkett's descriptions are quite important for that. More about that soon. So we began with this term social innovation, and in fact I'm here in India specifically looking at social innovation. This is innovation that may or may not come from social entrepreneurship or social enterprise. Doesn't have to. It may do. It could come from non-profits, from business. Even governments are able to produce social innovation. So social innovation is what Nesta, and Nesta is in the UK one of, if not the leading organization in this space for talking about public innovation in the public space for community. Nesta organization describes social innovation as something innovation that's explicitly for the social and public good. So it's not about private market goals. Innovation inspired by desire to meet social needs, which are typically neglected by traditional forms of private market provision and affect poorly served people. I think a good example that is very current these days in Melbourne is affordable housing. So we take housing to be, in some cases, actually a fundamental right, but while the housing market per se is strong as a investment, the number of people who are excluded because of the prices and so on and so forth is quite large, and therefore people are looking for social innovations that can answer that question. That is, create affordable housing. That would be a local example. So yeah, I'm sorry about some of the formatting. For some reason I lost. Oh no, there we go. Two examples which we've actually referred to before, so hence I'm not going to replay the videos, but you may wish to, because they're good examples of what we're talking about using design thinking. Two good examples of social innovation are both the Aravind Eye Clinic and the, not Grameen Foundation itself, but the microfinance model that Grameen helped develop. Well, Muhammad Yunus helped develop, and Grameen Bank was an outcome of that. If you remember or you recall, Aravind Eye Clinic provides eye care for poor people and others, and basically affordable eye care for those people who can't afford much is subsidized by those people who can pay. So behind the Aravind Eye Clinic is a business model, an innovative business model, some might say a good social innovation that makes that possible. So Aravind is quite a good example there. The other example of Grameen Bank, but of microfinance per se, when it began also as a social innovation, was a social innovation in that banking at the time, loans for women, small loans, very small loans, were not an option. Banks would not loan women such small amounts that they required, and the loan sharks would charge them huge amounts of interest. So Yunus stepped in and helped found Grameen Foundation, and Grameen Foundation essentially was a bank, for these small investors, and they would group together in what in India is called SHGs, that's self-help groups, and together would kind of mutually pay this off. So there's two good examples. Now it's rather interesting from the critical side to see that actually microfinance in its initial form has lost some of its shine. Interest rates, which originally were very good, and the whole model was very good, have gone up and up. And so it reached a point where more recently typical microfinance, including through Grameen Bank, would be charging 20+% interest. What's happened is a new innovation stepped in. Well, someone saw this and took advantage of the fact that you could create microfinance on the web. And there are new microfinance initiatives in India that charge very low rates, 6 to 12%. And they basically use the web as a platform. So they've kind of challenged the original microfinance, which kind of lost its way. So that's not unusual either. So Ingrid Burkett's using the business model canvas for social enterprise design, which is a PDF that's available. I think I've got a link to it on this website. And she talks in detail about what it means to detail the 9 dimensions of the business model when you're dealing with a social enterprise design. One of the key things you'll see is that in the area of one area of the business model, how that differs when you're dealing with a social enterprise, is that if you're employing people in your business, people who need employment, then they're not customers, they're beneficiaries. And so a social business model underlying social enterprise may have customers, that is people who buy goods and services, but it may also have beneficiaries, who are the people who benefit. The big issue is another case in point. The people who sell the newspaper on the street and get a percentage of that sale are beneficiaries. They're not customers. The customers are you and I. So it's important to see that when you start moving into the social enterprise design space, you have to look at those 9 dimensions a little bit differently in terms of specifying, all sorts of things like the value proposition and so on. Something to think about. Oops, sorry. Now let's go there. So, so there you are with all that. Now. One of Tim Brown and Jocelyn Wyatt, who work with IDEO, actually wrote quite a often cited article of sorts for the SSIR entitled Design Thinking for Social Innovation. So they specifically look at that connection. And they talk about why the non-profit sector sometimes, and the social enterprise sector have taken up design thinking. Okay, so this is kind of a development from his earlier talk about design thinking for business. And you've seen in the case studies during the semester of Design Kit what IDEO means by that when they say social innovation through design thinking, those cases that we have together looked at. So the other thing I would say is compare some of those examples, which also have social enterprise as an underlying business model in some cases, with, for example, the if you remember the slum redevelopment in southern India, there's a case of design thinking contributing to social design, right? But not, well, potentially social innovation, but definitely not social enterprise. Yeah. Redesign of slums, including people participatory design. The approach was relatively innovative, I suppose, but not really, certainly not a social enterprise. but probably a good example of social design. You saw, or we saw, fairly early on, I think it was week 1 or 2, and I'll just repeat this one here, the story of Cara Pecknold, who also used design thinking to produce what I would call a good social design with social impact, for women. I don't know that it was a social innovation. In fact, I'm certain it wasn't. What she realized was that the women who could make crafts in Rwanda, they needed a proper channel to be able to sell their things. And that idea about arts and crafts, whether in Rwanda or anywhere else, as to needing a market and needing a channel for that market, Pecknold figured out using design thinking, and then helped create a response to that. So there's a good example again, of design thinking, creating good social design and impact. Not a social enterprise again, not really a social innovation, not in terms of what it was, because that model had been around for some time. So the Vision Spring example, which is something IDEA worked on, about eye screening for kids. If you Google IDEA, you'll find Vision Spring. So this was about eye tests, and the nice thing about it was that through the process of coming up with this good example of social design through design thinking and through the screening process, the team discovered that the best way to get kids screened and to get them, feeling good about it, was to involve them in the process. So that, of course, connects to our participatory design discussion. Not really co-design, but certainly participatory design in a social design project using design thinking. So that's an interesting example. Oh, and I should say that so the Vision Spring idea or model, which then spread across India and elsewhere, in a sense, the way it was set up, you have local people employed. Had as a sort of a model social enterprise behind it in the way it operated. Sorry, that's why it says insights from social enterprise. In our paper, which you've also read, about socially responsible design, we say that the best way to achieve social design, but we call it socially responsible design, which I think is stronger, and our criteria are a little stronger than the usual definition. We say that you should be focusing on a community or user need. You should be developing something that is suitable or culturally appropriate, that fits, that works in the location, okay, so that people don't go, this is weird. It needs to be affordable. That is, it needs to meet it needs to adapt to the incomes and economics, if you like, of the place where you're designing for. It should promote employment, local employment, regional jobs. One of the problems with some so-called innovations is people drop in from the West and bring something in, and it doesn't actually create jobs. It's just a new toy. So where possible, we're also looking for creating jobs. It needs also when the foreigners go home, it needs to be controlled locally. That is, maintained, controlled, understood. If when the foreigners leave and something has been innovated with their help, if while while uh, while the external experts are not there, if there are so many cases of whether it's toilets or anything else, compost toilets or anything else, just basically being disused, left, abandoned as soon as the locals go. So that's no good. It needs to be flexible and adaptive to changing circumstances, and that can be like, for example, when you're constructing a house, what materials are used. The materials should be local and therefore adaptive in that sense. There are geographies where earthquake and so on is common, and so local people know this, and for hundreds of years they've built with structures that can manage that and are easy to repair. Empowerment is important, and then dependency is the other thing that we're also trying to avoid. That is, we're trying to not set the country or the community or the village up to be dependent on us. It's not about us, it's about them and their independence. So, all of that implies that the hero designer and so on, and all of the things that go with that, we need to revisit that model and that the thinking that underlies that. Life straw, which possibly you may have heard of, perhaps if you've done industrial design or product design. So it was this was a straw that you could that you can still, of course, take around, and it would filter dirty water when you're kind of traveling around and you're desperate for water purification system. So this was an innovation which originally was touted as empowering communities and so on, or at least not empowering communities, sorry, solving a key problem of water access. It ended up actually that the people who mostly buy this are people who go sort of bushwalking and tramping and stuff in the West. It's not. It doesn't really. It hasn't become some affordable innovation for Africa, which was one of the ideas. And this innovation in commerce, in a sense, diverted everyone's attention from the fact that there was a bigger problem of actually dealing, properly, governments and countries dealing with the problem of lack of access to water. So it's kind of a diversionary tactic rather than an actual solution in that sense. You are working, and especially, towards the towards week 9, but towards week 12 at least. But even now, working through the business model canvas, and as I said to you, if you look closely at what Ingrid Burkett says. She makes it clear that for each of these, for the partners, but certainly the customer segments, customer relationships, and revenue streams and cost structure, those things down there, when you're building a social enterprise, then because it's not just a straight up business, there are other questions you need to answer, other things you have to focus on. And as I think I was saying in one of the tutorials, it's hard to compete when you're a social enterprise in the market just with product, because you've got extra costs. You employ people, you maybe have to train them and everything else. So that makes that hard, and therefore it's important to compensate by having a great value proposition. So to give you an example, when I go into the supermarket to buy coffee, and there's a fair trade coffee there from East Timor, and there's just an ordinary whatever coffee brand. The reason I choose, and I can choose because of my income, the reason I choose the fair trade one is because it has a value proposition about the farmers and their benefits that I'm prepared to pay a slight difference for. Okay, so that's a key to in the social enterprise space. So it is, if you look in Ingrid Burkett's PDF, which I've mentioned, you'll see that. So she, the way she deals with it on her canvas is she has the sort of blue post-its highlight the commercial focus. Yeah. So in customer segments, for example, she's talking about the customers, and she uses the pink post-its to focus on the social goals and channels and resources and so on. Yeah, that's how she deals with it. In fact, if you look around the net, you can even find already modified versions of the business canvas, which are called the social business canvas, for example. So you could use that, but for our purposes, I think just focusing on both the blue and the pink factors, if you like, is the key. So week 8 we are. You have today in the tutorial class, you're going to work with your the rest of the class and potentially others on testing your different prototypes for your projects, and get feedback on that using the forms which Tommy and Naomi will give you. So that's really the first half of the class. The first 1 hour is really going to be that sharing out of those of your prototypes and aspects of your prototypes. And we've talked about that last week in the tutorial. What do we mean by prototypes? Storyboarding, service scenarios, all of those sorts of things, paper prototypes and wireframing and so on. That's happening, today, with a view to week 9, of course, when I'll be back. I do hope, cross fingers, and you will be presenting your ideation phase. Somebody asked me last week, what does that look like? It looked pretty much the same format as the previous one. You need to show at least 6 methods. It should be 10 minutes long. It should be with 20 slides. Have a quick look, and don't, if you can avoid it, don't make me wait too long. These 20-minute presentations with which are double the time. Try and keep it pithy and focused. and think about, as you fill out, aspects of your social business model, what kind of social impact you're trying to achieve. Whether what you're doing is an innovation, that's an interesting question you can answer, perhaps, or think about. Or whether it's just social design, which is also not bad. But all of those are questions for this week and for next week. Anyway, best of luck with that, and I look forward to seeing you, catching up with you. And in the meantime, you will most likely hear from me when I finally get back to a hotel and I have proper internet access or something that I can catch up. Okay, thank you.